You spend enough time on the road, you learn that the world has two faces. There's the one everybody sees, the one with the sun and the maps and the mile markers. And then there's the other one, the one that only comes out after midnight, in the dead empty spaces between towns, when it's just you, the hum of your engine, and a whole lot of nothing. I've driven more miles than I can count, seen things that'd make a city boy's hair stand on end and stay that way. But most of it you can explain away. Fatigue, tricks of the light, your mind playing games on the long, lonely stretches. Most of it, but not this, not what's out there in West Texas. If you've ever driven that part of the country, you know what I'm talking about. The sky is so big it feels like it's trying to swallow you, and the land is so flat and empty it feels like God ran out of ideas when he got there. And everywhere you look, you see them, the old windmills. They stand out there like skeletons, rusted and broken, sentinels of forgotten farms, their blades frozen in place for 50, 60 years. They call that stretch the bone orchard, not for people, but for all the dead iron sticking out of the ground. It's a quiet place, eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. Now, most of those windmills are exactly what they look like, dead. Just old metal telling the story of a time that's long gone. But there are stories, the kind you only hear at a truck stop at 3 a.m. over burnt coffee. Stories about one of them, one particular windmill on a long, straight shot of road, 100 miles from anywhere. The old-timers, the ones who've been running these routes since before the interstates, they talk about it in a low voice. They say this one's different. They say it's always turning. I'd heard the talk for years, chalked it up to road fatigue and too much caffeine, a legend to pass the time, to give the rookies something to be scared of. They said it turns even when the air is dead still, so calm you could light a match and the flame wouldn't even flicker. They said it's not the wind that turns it, and they said if you drive by it late enough, when the moon is down and the darkness is total, you can hear something. Something that ain't the wind whistling through rusty metal. They called it the Whispering Mill. I'd always just nod along, sip my coffee, and think it was a hell of a story. I'm not the kind of guy who spooks easy. In this line of work, you can't be. You see a deer in the road, you don't panic, you react. You hear a strange noise from the engine, you don't pray, you pull over and figure it out. Everything has a reason, a logic. That's what I believed. That's what got me through 30 years of staring at asphalt. Then, last fall, I picked up a load in El Paso, a rush job headed for Louisiana. The dispatcher mapped the route for me, the fastest one. I didn't even look at it too close, just plugged it into the GPS. It was late afternoon when I pulled out, and I knew I'd be driving straight through the night. The sun was setting as I cleared the city limits, painting that big Texas sky in shades of orange and blood red. It was beautiful and lonely, the way it always is. And as the last sliver of light disappeared, I settled in for the long, dark haul, completely forgetting the stories, the warnings, and the name of that lonely stretch of road that was waiting for me up ahead. The first few hours of a night drive are the best. The world settles down, the radio plays old country songs, and you feel like you're the only person left on the planet. The miles just melt away under your wheels. I was in that groove, thinking about nothing in particular, just letting the rhythm of the road take over. The darkness out there in West Texas is a different kind of darkness. There are no city lights to pollute the sky, so the stars look like someone spilled a bag of diamonds on black velvet. It's so clear, you feel like you could just reach out and touch them. Around 1 a.m., the air got heavy. You know that feeling just before a storm? That thick, electric stillness. I checked the weather on the radio. Clear skies all the way to the state line. But the air in my cab felt wrong. It was dead calm outside. Not a leaf, not a bit of roadside trash was moving. The flags at a closed-down gas station I passed hung limp and lifeless against their poles. The kind of stillness that feels unnatural. That's when I started noticing the windmills again, dark shapes against the starlight. Each one I passed was exactly as you'd expect, motionless, a silent monument to a dead dream. I was on a two-lane highway, straight as an arrow, disappearing into the horizon. There hadn't been another car for at least an hour. It was just me and the endless, flat dark. I started feeling a little restless. The coffee wasn't hitting the same. The silence in the cab, usually a comfort, was starting to feel loud. I fiddled with the radio, but all I could get was static that seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. I turned it off. The hum of the diesel engine was the only sound in the world. And then I saw it.
It was maybe a mile up the road, off to the right, standing alone in a field of scrub brush. It was just a silhouette, same as all the others, but something was different. My headlights caught the glint of it. It was moving. The blades were turning. Not fast, not like they would in a strong gust. It was a slow, steady, deliberate rotation, like an old man patiently waving me forward. My first thought was logical. A freak wind, a thermal current coming off the cooling desert floor. There had to be an explanation. I rolled down my window, sticking my head out into the night. The air hit my face, and it was as still and warm as bathwater. There was no wind, not a breath. I could hear the high-pitched whine of my own tires on the asphalt, but nothing else. I pulled my head back in, my heart starting to thump a little harder against my ribs. I kept my eyes on it as I got closer. The slow, rhythmic turning didn't change. Creak, turn, creak, turn. I couldn't actually hear it yet, but I could feel that rhythm in my teeth. It was hypnotic. Part of my brain, the practical trucker part, was screaming that this was impossible. Metal doesn't just decide to move. There's always a force, physics. But the other part of my brain, the ancient part that knows about the dark, was starting to wake up, and it was scared. I was a few hundred yards away now, my headlights washing over its rusted base. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The stories from the truck stop came flooding back, no longer sounding like tall tales, but like a map of the place I now found myself in. As I drew level with it, the world seemed to go quiet. The steady drone of my rig's engine, the one sound that's been the constant soundtrack to my life, it just faded into the background. It was still there, I knew it was, but it was like my ears were refusing to hear it. They were listening for something else. And then it started. It wasn't a creak of rusty metal. It wasn't the whistle of wind. It was a sound I'd never heard before and hoped to God I'd never hear again. It was a whisper. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just the blood rushing in my ears, a trick of a tired mind. But it grew. It wasn't a single whisper. It was hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all talking at once. Imagine being in the middle of a massive, crowded hall, but instead of talking out loud, every single person is whispering. A soft, sibilant Russian sound, a carpet of voices, all murmuring secrets just below the level of understanding. You can't make out a single word, not one, but you can hear the cadence, the rhythm of speech. You can hear the questions, the statements, the arguments, all woven together into one continuous rustling noise. And it was coming from the windmill. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a ghost story anymore. This was happening. The sound seemed to bypass my ears and pour straight into my skull. And the worst part, the part that makes my skin crawl even now, was the feeling that came with it. The whispers weren't random. They felt personal. I had the unshakable, terrifying certainty that they were talking about me. They were telling my story, every wrong turn I ever made, every lie I ever told, every person I ever hurt. It was all in there, in that mess of sound. I felt like I was being judged by a jury of 1,000 bodiless voices.
Panic,
cold and sharp, shot through me. My foot slammed down on the accelerator. The engine roared to life, the stacks belching black smoke. But the sound of the whispers didn't get drowned out. It got louder. It rose with the engine's roar, cutting right through it. The faster I went, the more urgent and intense the murmuring became, as if they were desperate for me to hear, to understand the verdict they were delivering. I was right alongside it now, a blur of rust and motion in my passenger window. I didn't dare look. I kept my eyes glued to the white line on the road, my hands strangling the steering wheel. The cab of my truck, my sanctuary, my home, felt violated. It felt like they were in there with me, their cold breath on the back of my neck, their whispers crawling inside my head. It was a violation of the soul. I finally pulled ahead of it, the truck screaming down the empty highway. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I drove for another solid mile, maybe two, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound was gone. Silence crashed back in, absolute and deafening. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. After another minute, I got up the nerve to look in my rearview mirror. I half expected to see it still there, right behind me, chasing me down the highway. But what I saw was worse. In the faint red glow of my taillights, the windmill was perfectly, utterly still. The blades were frozen, a dark cross against the starry sky, as if they had never moved at all, as if it was all just waiting for me.
For the next 100 miles, I didn't just drive, I fled. My foot was welded to the floor, the needle hovering on the red line. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like it was about to move. Every glint of light from a road sign felt like an eye watching me. The silence in my cab was the worst part. Before, it was peaceful. Now, it was empty. It felt like a space that had just been vacated, the air still holding the impression of what was there. I kept thinking I could still hear the edge of a whisper, the tail end of a word right on the edge of my hearing. My mind was a war zone. The logical part of me, the part that knows how an engine works and how to read a map, was desperately trying to find an explanation. It was the tires on the asphalt, it screamed. You were overtired, you were hallucinating. It was an acoustic anomaly, wind bouncing off the metal in a weird way. I clung to those thoughts like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. But they were no match for the memory. You can't explain away a feeling. You can't use logic to debunk the absolute certainty that you are being observed and judged by something you cannot see. The sound was one thing, but the feeling, that was the truth of it. The feeling of being known, of having the darkest corners of your life laid bare and discussed in cold, dry whispers. That's what had me shaking.
I finally saw the lights of a 24-hour truck stop up ahead, a little island of light and life in the ocean of darkness. I've never been so happy to see greasy fluorescent lights in my life. I pulled my rig into the lot, killed the engine, and just sat there for a full 5 minutes, my hands trembling in my lap. The silence was absolute. I stumbled inside. The place smelled of stale coffee and bacon. A couple of other drivers were sitting at the counter, nursing mugs and talking low. I got a coffee, and my hand was shaking so much I spilled some on the counter. The waitress gave me a funny look. I just mumbled an apology and went to a booth in the corner, facing the door. I sat there watching the other drivers. They looked tired, same as always. They were talking about fuel prices, dispatchers, and bad weather, normal things. I wanted to walk over to them, grab one by the shoulders and ask, "Have you ever heard it? Out on that empty stretch, the voices." But the words wouldn't come. How do you say it? How do you tell someone you think a piece of farm equipment read your soul? They'd think I'd lost my mind. They'd call the company, say I wasn't fit to drive. So I just sat there, drinking my coffee, feeling completely and utterly alone. The experience had put a wall of glass between me and everyone else. They were on one side, living in the real world, and I was on the other, with the memory of those whispers. The road home had never felt so long.
It's been a few years since that night.
I still drive, it's the only life I know. But something's different. Something broke in me out there on that dark highway, and it never quite healed right. I'm a jumpier man than I used to be. The easy silence of a night drive isn't a comfort anymore. Now, it's just a void. I keep the radio on all the time, even if it's just a blizzard of static. Anything to fill the space. Anything to make sure I'm the only one in the cab. I don't take that route anymore. Ever. If a dispatcher tries to send me through that part of Texas, I refuse the load or I take a detour that adds 4 hours and 100 miles to my trip. My company thinks I'm eccentric. They don't know I'd rather face down a blizzard in the Rockies than drive that flat, empty road at night. I thought a lot about what happened, about what that thing was. Is it a ghost? I don't know. I'm not a religious man. Is it some kind of echo? A place on the earth where feelings and voices have gotten stuck, replaying over and over? Maybe. The old-timer said that whole area was full of heartbreak. Farms that failed, families that fell apart, people who put their entire lives into that hard land only to have it give them nothing but dust and sorrow. Maybe all that pain and regret soaked into the ground, into the metal of that windmill. Maybe it just sits there, listening to the quiet. And when someone comes by who's full of their own regrets, it recognizes a fellow traveler and tries to talk.
But it was the message, the warning, that haunts me the most, the one I was supposed to hear but wasn't allowed to understand. I think about my life, the miles I've run from things, the wife I left behind in my 20s because the road called to me more than she did, the kids I know more through photographs than I do in person, the mistakes that pile up like mile markers in the rearview mirror. I can't shake the feeling that the whispers were a summary, a final accounting, not angry, not evil, just a statement of fact, a cold, impartial audit of my soul, whispered on a lonely night in the middle of nowhere. So let me tell you this, out on the road, there are more things than are dreamt of in your philosophy, as the man said. And if you're ever driving out in the deep, dark heart of Texas, and you see a lone windmill turning when the air is dead and still, speed up, roll up your windows, turn up your radio, and don't you dare listen, because some things, once they're heard, can never be unheard. And some messages, even if you can't understand the words, you'll carry the weight of them for the rest of your damn life.